Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I apologise for the lack of audience and drama compared to last week. But it is at least 15 degrees Fahrenheit cooler, so that's nice. Yes? Right. There is no fire alarm due this evening, although now and again perhaps we should schedule one. So if it goes off, it probably is a fire, or at least a malfunctioning alarm. If it goes off, the Democratic Services Officer will find a safe route out of the building, and with luck will come back and tell us what it is. Now, the meeting this evening is due to be webcast. May I ask if anyone else is intending to either record or broadcast this meeting other than our own webcasting service? That's not to stop anyone, that's just so we know. Now, it doesn't make the most thrilling television, I must admit. Right. Now proceed on to the agenda. Item 1, apologies for absence. Where of Councillor Vizard. Anyone else? Councillor Stockwell. Councillor Harwood has Councillor Harwood apologised as he's not here yet? No, we can assume. Sorry? Right, thank you very much, Michael. Right. Item 2, notification of substitute members. I know Councillor Butler's here for Councillor Stockwell.
Yeah, Councillor Butler for Councillor Stockwell. Thank you.
Any other substitute members? I don't see any. We did, to be fair, we did have an offer for a substitute member. Unfortunately, he hadn't undertaken the training yet, so he was unable to attend for Councillor Vizard. That was Councillor Willis, but he did offer, but he could not do so. Item 3, notification of visiting members. I don't see any. Items withdrawn from the agenda. Item 4, I'm not aware of any. Are there any withdrawn items, Mr. Bailey? No, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Item 5, we don't have any urgent updates, so I will pass quickly over that. Item 6, disclosures by members and officers. None. Thank you very much. Item 7, disclosures of lobbying, I will take with the applications. Item 8, to consider whether any items should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I'm not aware of any. So we will take all of the meeting in public. If that's agreed, members? Agreed, thank you. So we move rapidly on to the applications for this evening, and just before we do that, I'll ask the legal officer to briefly introduce how we're going to do that. Thank you very much, Mr. Fitzpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a short announcement for members of the public, and in particular those who are speaking on any item this evening. The Chairman will call an item, and the Planning Officer will then introduce the item. The Chairman will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please can you come forward to the table in front of you and take a seat. To speak, press the middle button. You do not need to hold it down. The button will turn green, and the ring around the mouthpiece on the microphone will turn red. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and you'll see your time counting down on the screen in the corner behind me, to my right, to your left. At the end of 3 minutes, the Chairman will tell you when your time is up. Once you finish speaking, please press the middle button again. It will turn white and return to your seat. There are no visiting members this evening. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Mr. Ryan to present the report on item 9, page 1, please.
Thank you, Chair. This first item is land to the west of Millbank. This application is for reserve matters following the earlier approval of outline planning permission. The reserve matters application looks at appearance, landscaping, layout and scale for 62 dwellings, including 40% affordable housing, planting, landscaping and informal open space. This first slide is looking along the front boundary of the site, looking northwest out of Headcorn. You can see the present planting along the frontage and the informal parking spaces.
I think we might have to turn the screen slightly, so if you... It's not doing anything. On a rule that as we've only just started, you can join us, Councillor Hall. We've literally had the first sentence, so I don't think that's significant. Oh well, so much for an early finish. Unfortunately, Ray rushes out to the courier run.
Well, that's it. Thanks, Stuart. We might...
Hello, that one's gone off again. Stay still, Mr. Mumford. You're interrupting the picture. Every time you turn a page, it goes on and off.
I think I will just have to refer to that one.
Yeah. Don't touch it, it might go off. We need one that's working. One's good. I'll give him that another minute. Thanks for trying, though, Councillor Clark.
This second slide is looking in the same direction, just showing the existing properties on the opposite side of Millbank, on just opposite the actual site frontage. This is looking in the opposite direction back towards Headcorn, with the application site boundary on the right-hand side. Just again showing the properties on Millbank and the height of those properties. This slide is the unmade service track which runs along the southern boundary of the site. The site boundary is on the left-hand side of the image, with the hedgerow on the right, actually within the application site. This is looking from the opposite direction back towards that surface track, with properties in Millbank just about visible through the trees there. This image is looking towards Millbank. You see the properties there with the access track on the right-hand side, and the hedgerow along the Millbank boundary. It's looking north-east towards the open countryside, with Headcorn settlement behind you. Looking around slightly to the north, with Millbank on your right-hand side. This image is the outline layout plan, which was approved at the outline planning permission stage. You can see the open space in the northern part of the site, Millbank running along the top of this image. You have the bowling green, a listed building on the extent of the Headcorn settlement. The service track runs along the southern boundary, which is the right-hand side of this image. This image is the current Reserve Matters application following the actual layout, which was approved at outline stage, with hedgerows along the southern boundary, the access point in Millbank, which was approved at the outline stage as well, the attenuation pond within the open space, and the leap. The 2.5-storey building, which was mentioned in consultation response, is on the right-hand side of this image, along the southern boundary of the site. This is a typical image of the type of property that's provided, with the gable frontage, the soldier course brick lintels, and the front porch. That's property is 2-bedroom. Just in terms of the streetscapes and sections, these are sort of sections through the site. The bottom section shows the 2.5-storey building on the left-hand side, and yeah, just showing the sort of the variety of property types. The officer recommendation is to approve and that is subject to one additional planning condition, which asks for renewable sources of renewable and decentralised energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ryan. We come now to our first speaker this evening, Councillor Dungy, Headcorn Parish Council. If you come forward and press the grey button in the middle, please.
Good evening. Little different atmosphere from last Thursday, thank goodness. Now, Headcorn Parish Council object to the appearance and the layout of this proposal. It will result, we think, in the urbanisation of the northern approach to the village and thus contravene the landscape policy ENV 34. Our council was consulted by Bovis, and we made it very clear that locating 3-storey flats in the highest location in the parish will damage the scenic quality and distinctive character of this special landscape area, and will therefore also be at odds with emerging policy SP17. Header Planning will be aware of the many complaints about the recently completed countryside development, located in a much less prominent position in the village. This has resulted in a totally unacceptable block of flats pretending to be 2.5-storey dwellings. We are awaiting the outcome of a meeting recently held about this in Headcorn, which included senior planning officers and members, to find out what went wrong in allowing such an intrusive development to be built in a village. We do not want this committee to make the same mistake again with this application. In his report, the officer refers to policy HNP1 of the emerging Headcorn neighbourhood plan. Now, we're pleased that the officers are now using our plan, but we're disappointed with their interpretation. Let's be clear, 2.5-storey properties, as defined in that policy and as seen typically on the ground in Headcorn, means the whole of the upper floor is contained within the roof space. This is not what was developed on the countryside site, and is not what is proposed here, where most of the upper floor is below the roof space. We urge members to look carefully at the height of the proposed flats and compare them to the closest existing dwellings, and you should quickly conclude that the impact of this proposal is unacceptable and clearly contrary to ENV 34, SP17 and HP1. We urge members to reject this application and to request that the developers have a more meaningful dialogue with us and the officers here on what is acceptable. Hopefully, planning councils learn from what has gone before, learn from impacts caused by existing developments, and especially from any mistakes made. They say hindsight is a wonderful thing. Perhaps in this case, we can make use of it, especially with regard to so-called 2.5-storey buildings. Hindsight plus compromise might satisfy all parties, especially the people who live there. We hope so. Thank you.
Pardon me. Do I see Mr. Lawrence for the applicant? I didn't think I did. Oh, well. Before we go on, Councillor Powell, you did enter some time into
Yes,
the...
so sorry, I was just waiting for a chance to offer my apologies, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, I'm going to have to apologise to you because, unfortunately, because of you missed over half the officer's introductory presentation, you're going to have to
No, I appreciate
be a
that.
spectator. I do apologise.
That's right.
Right. Now, can I take any declarations of lobbying at this point? Councillors for Headcorn, no surprise there. Councillor Harwood, myself, anyone else? Councillor Mumford, thank you very much. I assume everyone else knows not. Right. Obviously, Councillor Prendergast, you indicated way early on in the meeting, so you get to kick off.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Headcorn Parish Council. It saddens me that's a beautiful green field, long-range views to the Green Sand Ridge, but that's by and by. We've given outline permission and we need to get on with it. Mr. Ryan, I'm going to direct my questions to you, please, if you don't mind, because we set up a development delivery group and we met on the 28th of March and we had a nice hour or so there, and then I left and I know you walked up to look at the development at Lenham Road. So we spent this time there and we discussed lots of things. We discussed the 2.5-storey building and where it was going to go. And we expressed concern. I did, Councillor Round did, the Parish Council did. And the developer seemed amenable to revisiting the layout and coming back to us, which we were all very happy with. We spoke about materials, and they said they would look at that and come back to us. We spoke about, you can see, it is not connected to the village in any meaningful way. There's not even a footpath there, and you have to cross an extremely busy road to get to the other side. So we had a long conversation about a footpath. We had a conversation about connectivity, and we spoke about a pull-in for the bus to stop, because 62... You know, there are children that will need to get to schools. There are people who will need to get to stations. Nothing. And I'm sure I've read this report twice now just to make sure that it's not me, because I do have a tendency at the moment, because I'm very busy, to miss things. But these things are not there. And what I'm disappointed about, and this is in no way a reflection on you, because, you know, it's what was that? A talking shop? Nothing. We've got nothing out of it. It was an absolute waste of my petrol, my time, to drive to that site for the developer to offer nothing at all. And I think these, you know, if this is how these development delivery groups are, then they're a waste of time. And I really feel quite strongly that if this was a condition of the outline application, that we meet, that we talk. I'm not going to use the word promises, but you know, assurances were given at that meeting and we haven't got them. And I really think in this instance we need to call a stop to this meeting. We need to go back and talk to Bovis Homes and ask them to provide the information that we requested. We don't even have we spoke about planting, we spoke about landscaping, nothing, absolutely nothing. We've just got what we had for the outline application. And I'm not comfortable with this, I really am not.
Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. I'll call on the second ward member for Headcorn, Councillor Round, at this point.
I could rant and rave even worse. Quite frankly, I can only endorse everything that my fellow councillor has said. And quite frankly, we've gone nowhere. In fact, quite frankly, because we've spent so much time on it, we've actually gone backwards because several people have been involved in these conversations, and I see absolutely nothing has changed. I'm going to ask for deferment, potentially you may wish to discuss this further, but on the basis that absolutely nothing has changed, I believe that we should not be listening to this or considering this at all at the moment. I'll go on further, but what I will say is that Headcorn Parish Council have rightly said that this design-wise does not meet what we asked for. It does not come to anything. In fact, we are very fearful, having seen the countryside site in Headcorn, that we're going to develop a few more Colditz plots built out the eastern block, because that's exactly what they look like on the plans that we've already approved. They are an utter disgrace, the buildings that are being built in Headcorn at the moment, an utter embarrassment. And if these buildings finish up anything like that, then Headcorn itself will become the most disgraceful state and no longer a meaningful Wealden village. One has to remember that this is the meet and greet part of Headcorn. On one side of the road we have a typical vernacular of red bricks, red tiles and white lapboard weatherboarding. If we were to have this, are we going to have quality weatherboarding, not those horrible plastic things that we've had on the new sites? Are we actually going to have front gardens? Are we actually going to have something that looks meaningfully Wealden? I doubt it very much, because I see absolutely nothing has changed. And I suppose we might even finish up with some Juliet balconies with dirty laundry on them. That's what I really fear. I'm sorry, but I'm not convinced by this application at all.
Thank you, Councillor Round. I share your disapproval of Juliet balconies, amongst other things. Waste of space they are. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I think herein lies the tale, in that whenever we discuss outlines, we always state that the parameters set within the outlines need to encompass the detail that we want forward in the detailed application. I think we were very good at the outline permission in terms of layout. I think this layout that was driven by members creates a full stop to urban development. I think the real concern here was that we would get ribbon development right along the Headcorn Strait and meeting up with Sutton Valence. In terms of the juxtaposition of the open space and the way that the frontage has been protected, as it has been lost further north on the Sutton Road, remember, where they ripped out all the hedgerows and so on, we've managed to retain them here. So I think there are some good things about this scheme, and I think that the layout and the position of the open space and the protection of the frontage to the 87 Bort is very good. I agree with the ward councillors in terms of the detailing issues. I mean, we absolutely must insist that the weatherboarding is timber weatherboarding, that we do deliver that, and currently we have no surety on that. But I think there are ways around that. I think we just need to strengthen the condition and have either delegated or through some other process that we actually have a materials palette come back which has to be signed off and agreed. I think with the safeguard of a materials palette, I think we can overcome the issues. The big problem is, if we do anything else, if we seek to delay or even refuse, because there is an outline which is very clear in its parameters and what it states, we will end up with an appeal where we will not have any control over the detail of the materials. So what I would like to have some reassurance from officers on is that we can drive up the quality of the materials and actually have a process to achieve that. I think in terms of the height of the buildings, I mean, I think actually in context of this site it will work. That taller building is a very, very long way and set back a long way from the highway and from neighbouring properties, and I do not think will impinge on them. And many of us, not just in the rural area, but in villages, have had buildings taller than this built at the end of back gardens, where and this famous there's no right to a view issue. We've seen that writ large. I think we're on a hiding to nothing if we try and oppose that building, because it is so far from any others. I also think that villages and more established and organic urban areas, they are not all the same height. Through history, there were taller buildings and there were lower buildings and so on, and it is that juxtaposition of different heights of buildings actually gives some vertical interest. And for those of you who've been to the development on the NHS site at Coxheath, where a limit on the height of buildings was put in, that development feels Lilliputian. It feels so squat, and you think, why didn't they stick another floor on here or whatever to give it some vertical interest? So can I have some reassurance from officers on the materials issue? Because I think that is the one issue we can address.
Yes, but before you do, I think, whilst I take I think the Parish Council and ward members did actually raise some other issues that we ought to at least consider whether the conditions are robust enough before we progress, or whether they can be addressed in one way or another. One was landscaping, where reservations were expressed about that. So let's just check that we got that right before we progress any further. And this point about connectivity and lack of footpaths or anything else, is there anything we can do about these issues? Because if you have an isolated settlement like this and it's not connected to the village, yeah, it is an important point, and I do think we need to address the landscaping, the connectivity issues, particularly footpaths, and in light of current policies, cycleways, maybe, before we move on and assume that there isn't anything we can do, because all of those are issues that we may or may not be able to address.
Maybe if I'll start, there's three elements that came out of that, Mr. Chairman: landscaping, connectivity and the materials issue. I'll deal with the material issues and hand you back to my colleague to deal with the other two. I'll just refer members back to the original consent on the outline permission, which was condition 3, which requires details and samples of materials to be submitted. So in terms of the flexibility that members have, members could do tonight is set out a palette of materials that they wish to see. They could put that on as a informative, if they so wished, and said, with regard to condition 3 of the outline consent, the Planning Committee wished to see X the following materials. So when those details are submitted, they're not submitted yet, then obviously this consent would then have to inform that. Alternatively, you could duplicate what was on that outline consent and specify the material details now. So those are two options. It's not best practice, I would say, because you've already got a condition that deals with it on the outline, which is the planning permission stage, but you are considering appearance. It's what you're considering tonight, so you're well within your rights to turn around and say, if you wanted stock bricks, yellow stock bricks and red stock bricks, and you wanted timber weatherboarding, then you could specify that at the particular stage. So that's what members could do, and I'll hand to my colleague to deal with the connectivity and the landscaping matter.
Yes, I think in terms of landscaping, there have been full details submitted with this Reserve Matters application, and that has been subject to consultation. It's been subject to consultation with the Council's Landscape Officer, and they're happy, subject to the extra measures which come through the actual planning conditions, and that's set out at 502 in the actual report, including landscape maintenance and long-term management plan for the actual landscaping on the site. This Reserve Matters application includes landscape, so we are actually considering landscape. But also on the outline, there are planning conditions that also request that information. One option may be to remove landscaping from the current application and just deal with that through the planning condition. But saying that, the actual landscaping details that have been submitted, like I say, have been subject to consultation and are considered fine. In terms of linkages to Headcorn, as you see on this image, there is a footpath along the opposite side of Millbank, and I think from memory, on the application side of Millbank, there are footpaths on the Headcorn side. Because it's not really possible to actually put a footpath along the frontage of the site because you have the hedgerow. But there is a road behind that, which does actually link up with the footpath across the site. I think the footpath along the southern side of the site, along the service road, is also being maintained. So I think, in my view, it does link up with existing footpaths and with the Headcorn settlement.
Okay, I'll return to those issues later. Councillor Mumford.
I think we've got a communication problem. We had one meeting in March, no feedback. The developer seems to be wanting to satisfy the officer, but it's the community should be engaged with. We're talking about cobbling it together tonight and quickly saying we want stock bricks and we want timber cladding. I don't think we will do the job justice. I have just been through this. My parish council entered into 18 months to and fro communication with the developer, and we didn't get everything we wanted, but there was agreement at the end. And if one of the ward councillors put forward a deferral, I would like to see this deferred, and a meaningful meeting. That doesn't mean to say the ward councillors get their own way, but at least they come here understanding it, know that it's been talked about. So if either of those two wish to do that, I would support that. It's all about, we are the community, we represent the community, and I believe developers need to engage with the communities and not just one meeting with no feedback saying what the result of that meeting was.
Yeah, okay. Yes, I do see you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Clark is next, though.
Can you put up the plan again, the overhead plan of the site?
Can I also ask you to, once again, speak into the microphone?
Okay. So, can I understand the footpath? If you were to come out of that access road onto the Sutton Road or the A274 and you were to turn right, is there actually a pedestrian frontage on that section of the site as part of this plan? No, not necessarily left, because you might have to grub out the hedgerow at that point, and it doesn't go onwards from the site. But if you come out of the road and you were to turn right, on the actual site side, is there actually a pedestrian walkway? I mean, I think that's something that we should have, because if we're looking at that unmade road as our link to the village, should we not at least have the option to come out in the sort of more formal way onto that 274 and head towards Headcorn?
there is a footpath shown linking with the from the site access to the footpath to the right of this image. So it links up with the existing footpath along Millbank.
Did that answer your question, Councillor Clark, or not?
It did.
Thank you very much. Councillor Cox.
Thank you very much. We've now had 4 or 5 people speak about this. The 2 ward councillors spoke, and I think they raised a question that if I was the officer, I would want to say, I was at that meeting, I did hear what the public wanted, I did hear what you wanted, and what I'd want to hear is, actually, the developer came back and said, it's all right, I'm not going to do any of that. Because that's what it appears must have happened. But I would have thought that the officer would have said, I can be absolutely categorical that they haven't been like that, and they've tried and made every effort to listen to everything that happened, and therefore this is what we've come up with. If it was different than that, then I do fall on the side of something's gone wrong between the public talking with the developer and our own officer. And I just wonder what must have happened in between. And I do take on board what's been said about trying to cobble things together now. I understand what Councillor Harwood is saying, and I would hope that the developer wouldn't see this as us trying to block this and delay. This is constructive, so we get the development correct and as right as it can be agreed, and on all sides people feel that they've achieved as best they can for their own residents, be it the councillors, the parish council, and indeed I hope the developer would think that. And most of all, I hope our officer would feel that, because they are the linchpin between all of us. And if the developer comes back after that consultation and goes, here we are, this is what I've come up with, I would hope the officer would say, hold on, this isn't what we agreed. I'd really like to hear what the officer would say about that. I know it's not constructive what I've just posed, but I'd like to hear the officer say, this really was the work of the developer who may have arrived, and what we've got as the best possible thing for us. Because if it is, I don't agree that we should defer. If the officer says this is the best we can get, I know there's no more, then I fall with Councillor Harwood. We mustn't be seen to delay this. But the ward councillors are saying differently. Please, could I hear from the officer directly?
We will in a moment, but first I'm going to ask Councillor Harwood briefly to come back. Then because it will take the officer a little time to get through the pack.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. There was a development committee that was established, and that met once at Maidstone House with the ward councillors, planning spokespersons and Headcorn Parish Council. And I think at that meeting some positions were stated and some changes were made at that first stage. However, as part of that meeting, there was a request from the ward councillors especially to meet the developer and from the parish council to meet the developer on site and to look at some issues on site. I think the concern here is that second meeting has not delivered, I think, what was hoped by the locals. But I think the first meeting, the slightly more formal one with all the plans in a planning committee, did deliver some of the changes. I think the problem is we're hidebound by the outline permission, and as we so often are.
Right. Whilst there'll be a moment or two, so Councillor Prendergast, unless you needed the officer to come back first.
No, I'll be very quick. How do I word this? When Councillor Harwood first started talking, I thought, goodness me, for once I do not disagree with what he's saying. But it didn't take very long for me to change my mind. I think what he's saying is the first meeting that we had, it was because we weren't getting very far in terms of layout, etc., that we decided to move on to site. So nothing was agreed, nothing concrete was said when we met at Maidstone House. We moved on to the site on the 28th of March, and I've already gone through the details that we asked for on site. And to say that we can ask, we can put an informative in or a condition in, I don't think councillors in this room, if you look at a development like Royal Engineers Road, would have been content to have passed that application and said, don't worry, we'll look at the red glass and the cladding and the bricks at a later stage. It doesn't matter. It's an informative. These things are important. We live there. We need to make sure that they are right. It's a big development. Nobody's arguing about the principle of development there. Everybody acknowledges that it's there. Let's just do a proper job. And not just a proper job. Let's do what the developer promised us. We met on site, the ward members, Headcorn Parish Council. We walked, or the rest of them did, to look at Colditz, the countryside development on Lenham Road. And I know that they looked at, in fairness, I don't think the 2.5-storey block was built at that time, because I went to look at it subsequently just a few weeks ago with Mr. Bailey and Mr. Jarman. So, and to say that, the positioning of that, of the block of flats is in the right place. It was evident when we were on site that it's not, because it's 16 metres from the hedge that backs on to the unmade road that you saw in the picture, with houses, two or three little cottages built alongside it. It is going to be so imposing. I would have thought we would have learned lessons from the countryside development. This is what it's all about. I have had so many conversations about this with Mr. Bailey, with Mr. Jarman, and I really thought we were getting somewhere. And clearly we haven't. 16 metres is nothing. It's from here to the end of this room, and it's going to be so imposing. And the developers seemed extremely sympathetic and said that they would come back to us, that it wasn't an issue moving things around slightly. And yet we've not heard a single word, nothing. So I'm sorry if I'm frustrated, but that's the way it is.
Okay, thank you very much. Right. I think it's fairly clear, given the terms of the outline permission, that an outright refusal would be difficult to suicidal. However, that does not necessarily mean that we should just simply do nothing. It's generally development committees work very well. For whatever reason, there does seem to have been a bit of a problem here. That in itself is disappointing, but not grounds for a refusal. However, having said that, we do need to find what we can and can't do. In terms of the landscaping condition, we have a landscape plan here. I'm not entirely sure what's wrong with it or what improvements are needed. But in terms of the materials, I'm uncomfortable with an informative related to the first application. I would prefer to specify at least the parameters of what we're looking at. And in terms of the landscape plan, I think if there is an issue, I'm not sure what it is at the moment, but if local members could actually direct me to what they feel the problem is, we might be able to do something about it one way or another. But I do need some further input on that because I'm not seeing the problem. But in terms of the layout, yes, the outline application clearly would be, the building of that height would clearly be within the terms of the outline application, but that's not necessarily mean that it should be in that location. So I think it would be open to members to defer, but I really do think that we need to be very clear what it is we are actually deferring for, because I am not 100% certain of what it is that you are actually seeking to achieve. I think I am with the materials and possibly with the building, but I'm really unclear as to the points about landscaping as to what you want to achieve. And I think if we're deferring, we do need a little bit of help with that. And Simply on the connectivity one, I'm struggling a little bit because, of course, that's essentially, I'm not saying we can't do anything about it, but again, I think we need to be very clear what it is you are seeking to achieve and whether or not it's possible, which is the point I think you were about to address, but we'll come back to you in a minute. So if you could think about that for a few moments, because it is important. Mr. Bailey, you were about to make a point.
I just wanted to clarify a couple of points. I mean, obviously 610 of the officer's report sets out the material detail. I've got the detailed materials plan in front of me, and I understand in terms of where the chairman's saying, said it very clearly in terms of if members consider that 2.5-storey building to be inappropriate in layout terms, well, that's a clear indication of what the concern raises. But with regard to the material issue, you know, as I said, the pallet says it's an Ivestock multi-stock brick, so it's a high-quality brickwork, and obviously, as I said, those materials would actually be submitted as part of that outline consent. I get the concern in terms of raised by the weatherboarding, because currently shown on the plan shows a weatherboard, a Marley Eternit, so it's a composite weatherboard. Now, we can easily change that by members clearly turning around tonight and saying that is unacceptable. We want feather edge boarding or we want timber boarding, so that is within your discretion to say we're not approving that material, we want to see timber weatherboarding. So that's within your control regarding that matter. With regard to surface treatment, it seems to me quite high quality surface treatment. You have got tarmacadon on the main access road in, but then they've got tubular block paving, which is an expensive high quality material to serve the secondary access routes around the site. So I would consider, again, that quality to be a good standard in that area. So we then move on to the landscaping scheme. As the chairman pointed out, I've got 2 plans in front of me that are very detailed, that go into a lot of detail with regard to landscape species. That has been through the council's horticultural officers and landscape officer who have raised no objection. So again, I think the chairman was very clear what are the concerns with the landscaping scheme, because it does follow that key principles that were established under the outline consent. So if it is just the location of that 2.5-storey building, the officer view obviously is that, you know, given its position, its setbacks, its proximity to the boundary, its screening from the hedging, that is acceptable. But if members were to turn around and say that's unacceptable, well, you know, an option is you could defer that and we could take that back, but obviously we'd have to consider, because the outline consent allows up to 2.5 stories, which was accepted at the outline scheme, doesn't say where, and we'd have to have very clear grounds why that is unacceptable, because if the applicant said no, that will result in a re-scheme, it would have to be brought back to members, and would you refuse it on the acceptability or not of that 2.5 storey? I think the officer's stance is that given its positioning within the site, that is, in our view, considered to be acceptable, but obviously members may have a different point.
Okay, in terms of the material condition, I think I think we should specify today. I don't think we should rely on the outline application. In terms of the landscaping, I'm listening, but I would need I think that's probably all right. I think I would really struggle with refusing it on the grounds of the location of the tower, but I think that it is within reasonable bounds to have a further look at that location and so I'm suggesting we amend the recommendation to actually have a condition specifying the materials, and if Councillor Harwood would care to assist us with that in a minute. And I will take a separate vote on deferral after that, because I want to know what we're deferring on. Councillor Harwood, can you do, and then Councillor Round, I will bring you in on the materials point.
Yeah, in terms of the materials, I think because of the setting of the development at a key gateway to this Wealden village, I think we really need to lay it on thick that there is a vernacular in the area, that high quality materials are required, including timber weatherboarding, whether we need to put feather edged or whatever, I'm not sure, but I think we at least need to specify white timber weatherboarding. I think that is specific and appropriate in this case. I just wanted to quickly touch upon the landscaping scheme, because I too looked at that early on, and it was a subject for an awful lot of discussion at the initial developer meeting. The sticking point here is around the environmental management plan, because of the protected species and so on, which led to a certain approach which was supported by Natural England and the ecological consultant and so on. Therefore, they did not want too much tree cover on it. They wanted a more meadow approach, and I think that was very much tied up with the ecology issue.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. That begins to make a lot more sense. Councillor Round, I want to bring you specifically on the material and anything you have on the landscape.
Can I just thank Councillor Harwood? I take that point and agree with that point about insisting on the timber weatherboarding. My actual point I wanted to raise still, this is one other issue that I've stuck my neck out on and will continue to do so. It was mentioned by the parish council earlier. I don't see down here, I'm fairly sure we mentioned it the previous time, a bus stop. I really do insist that there is some form of bus stop pull-off, in other words, to help with not creating traffic jams at the entrance to the village. I think we actually mentioned that in the original outline consent. Can somebody confirm that to me?
Yes, well, I was going to bring you in now anyway, but on this point.
Right, sorry. Just on the issue of the bus stop, I don't know what the plan's condition identifies by way of the drawings, whether that be on the outline consent or the reserved matters consent, but there is a condition, condition 20, requiring that there'll be no occupation until a section 278 agreement has been carried out. And that says, and this says, between the applicant and Kent County Council of the works identified in the application. Now, if the works identified in the application, as shown on the approved plans, indicate a bus stop, and the only way the bus stop can be delivered is through a 278 agreement, then I would expect that to be there. I've never seen the plans for it, I wouldn't do, but if they are on the plans, I would expect that, and maybe James or Tony can just confirm that in a sec. So that's probably where that might be delivered. The second issue, which was raised with regard to connectivity, again, might slightly go back to the Section 278 agreement, because there may be a requirement on the plans, I don't know, indicating that there may be a crossing from the site to the footpath on the other side of the road. I don't know, right? Alternatively, you can't ask the developer, if the developer doesn't own the highway edge, to impose a condition, say, you will form a footpath along there. It's not within the application site, it's not land that they own. So what they could do is they could provide the footpath and all that sort of thing within the site to connect to existing, but you can't ask them to make connectivity between the site and the town. You can't ask them to necessarily put in a footpath unless there is kind of like a cycle path which is going to be put in. But I think it does go back in part with regards to connectivity. What is part of the plans on the 278 stuff? Within the site connectivity, I don't think you can force that across to the main village. You can only connect onto those parts that go through. So there might be, if you've got the footpath on the other side of the road, which I accept, I accept that there may be some difficulty with regards to the footpath, but it may be getting across to it, which may be the problem. And I don't know whether the existing plans that have been submitted provide that. So, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Fitzpatrick. Right, let's find out, shall we, so far as we can.
With the outline permission, there was a transport statements put in, and there were various traffic measures included within that transport statement. That included the provision of a bus stop, included a interactive sign for traffic approaching Headcorn, with a smiley, sad face in terms of whether you're meeting the speed limit or not. Those measures and other highways measures are subject of current discussion with KCC Highways as part of the 278 agreement. The applicant has actually agreed recently, it was the 23rd of June, the applicant has confirmed that those measures will actually be installed. And, like I say, they're part of the transport statement which was approved as part of the outline permission. That package includes the bus stop, the speed sign, the 2 access points, pedestrian crossing points, and the gateway treatment.
Sorry, could you just, because that's what I thought you were going to say, can you clarify what you mean by pedestrian crossing point, please?
Those are points across the access points, the 2 access points to the site. Yes, there's the main access point and the secondary emergency access.
Okay, thank you. Right, Councillor Round, I think that was a fairly full answer to your questions. Is that insofar as it can? I think, okay. So, right. Okay, I'd just like to, I think we got the material condition nailed down, haven't we? I believe so. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to, all those in favour of first of all, this is 2 stages, amending recommendation as it stands to include a materials condition as specified. Is that agreed? Right, fine. Well, I think we're doing, okay, so right, we're taking it in 2 stages, right? And the reason, that is a, right, I'll do it again in a minute. Right. Proposed by myself, proposed by Councillor Harwood, seconded by myself, that we specify the materials at this stage. Is that agreed? Thank you. Right, that's everyone who is able to vote, or are you not voting? No. Okay, that's almost everyone.
So who's voting?
All those in favour? Yeah, okay, right. Okay, now, I think we did have to amend that first, because if we did it the other way around, we wouldn't have done that, which would just be deferred. Now, as far as I can see, we have bottomed out all the other issues insofar as we can, and it just is a straight question of whether members wish to defer to look at the location of the tower, of the 2.5 tall building. Right, I was going back to the Springfield discussion there for a moment. Of the 2.5-storey building, I think that has been proposed by Councillor Prendergast, I believe, Councillor Round, and seconded by Councillor Prendergast on that specific point alone, right, as we bottomed out everything else, that, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, thank you. I think we need some clarification here, because we have an outline permission that says it can go up to 2.5 stories. So in theory, the entire development could be 2.5 stories. There is one small component of this proposal which is 2.5 stories. So to take this forward in a defensible way, what is the narrative? Are we saying it should be within the development, it should face onto the open space, it should be on the urban edge? Because currently they've put it on the village edge rather than the countryside edge. I suggest that if they put it the other side, it would be far worse, because you'd meet Headcorn, and instead of it being a village, you know, you'd suddenly see a big building. So I need some clarity as to what officers are seeking to negotiate.
That very much anticipated me, but thank you very much for doing it. You did it in a far more eloquent way than I would. Right, as stated, that there is a need for a narrative or a justification for that. One moment. Mr. Bailey, did you want to come in at this point? Then.
No, I was just going to raise exactly the point. If that motion was carried to defer it for the relocation, I'd need to see exactly where members are going to specify where that building should go, because quite clearly the officer view, as I've said, is it's acceptable in that location in terms of the officer view. Notwithstanding that, as Councillor Harwood has already raised, the parameters on the outline allowed it to go up to 2.5 storeys in height, no more than. And that's what this building does do. So I'd need very clear direction.
Indeed, and that's what we're saying. Councillor Mumford, did you wish to throw any light on this?
The only thing I'm sat here confused about is we had a meeting with the developers who said certain things. Now, I don't know where the 2.5-storey building should go, but is there a better location that would be more acceptable to the community and the developer would be willing to do it? And I don't think we've exhausted that. And that's my problem. That's why I don't know what the developer hasn't even turned up tonight, but not that he'd be allowed to talk. Yeah, but through not completing that communication, we don't know, I don't know, if there's a better location, whether it's the village side, is there a lower point of the site, and would the developer be willing to move it? We don't know.
I'm going to draw this debate in a particular direction, if members permit. We do not necessarily need to specify where it goes. What we do need to specify is what's wrong with the current location. We do need to do that. So can we focus on that? Councillor Prendergast.
Okay. Right. This is a difficult one because I've already said, I mean, whichever way you look at it, it's a beautiful green field and it's trashed, okay, or will be. It'll have building on it. So if where it's positioned alongside the hedge, alongside the little slip road, with the houses there, in my view, it would be extremely imposing. And we have seen the impacts or the effects of imposing buildings elsewhere in Headcorn. Is that correct? I don't think Mr. Bailey will disagree with me on that one. I hope he won't disagree with me. So if we shift it round slightly, so it's almost backing onto the countryside, so it's angled sort of more on the corner rather than facing onto... That would be better. And my point is, if the developer hadn't been happy with that idea, he would not have suggested on site. He was quite agreeable. He said, the designer chap, do you remember? He said, yes, that's fine. We can look at that. We can shift it round a little. So he too saw that there was a problem with it. So let's do that.
Okay. Oh, sorry about this. Oh, letting you down there. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Doesn't happen often. No, it wasn't actually. Right. Okay. I think to cut this short, what we're essentially saying, Councillor Prendergast, here is that you wish that the impact is on that terrace row, call it what you will, of houses, and that is the point that you're making. And essentially, as far as I can see, that is the point of the deferral, is to move it to however that's done, or angle it however that's done, to lessen the impact on that row of houses. And I can't... do you wish to add anything, Councillor Borton, as you were grimacing at me? Meaningfully.
The problem is here, we've kind of danced on the head of a pin to an extent and getting really bogged down here. We all kind of know exactly why we want to defer it here. We just need, I think, quite a loose form of words that enables us to justify that decision. My issue with referring specifically to that row of terraces on the main road is what then happens if that actually turns out to be the best possible location because of the issues that's out. I mean, I'm kind of a bit slightly confused here at the justification because for what we kind of all want. I think we're getting slightly bogged down in what we actually need to do.
Councillor Clark, I'll bring you in just a second. Mr. Bailey, and we really must bring this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just to give some context to members in terms of Councillor Prendergast's view. Now, obviously, I wasn't on that site, but I think what I'm seeing is you're talking about shifting that building more around to the right-hand side. Now, obviously, the concept of doing that is what you end up doing, viewing from the road, you're opening up the view of that building. Now, the officers did consider that, obviously, when they're on site. I've been duly informed, he's right in front of you, you can ask him, did consider that, but in terms of the impact that that would have, what that was doing, that was opening up that building more to a view from the road. So if members were to do that, where it's been positioned in that site, it's against the backs of the houses. So accept the fact in where you're saying it's against into the hedge, but that hedge is quite, as you saw from the photograph, quite a thick, high hedge in terms of how it is as existing. And the way the arrangement, this layout has been arranged, is you effectively get your 2 stories when you come into the entrance into the site, and that building is actually read in the context behind those buildings. You shift that building around, you will open up that view. I'm just making members fully aware, because if we're going to go away and negotiate that, we have considered that already, shifting it around, but in the context of how that opened up that view, we considered that it would be better in the position it was located. So that's why the officer stance is as it is. We've considered the options and considered that is the best location.
Okay, Councillor Clark.
I wonder if we should consider a proposal, given that we've taken so long on this subject, and the fact that the developer is in the room, whether we shouldn't go ahead with the 3-minute speech from the developer at this point, so we can at least see what the developer would have said.
Sorry, what entertaining and interesting that can be, we cannot possibly do that. Right, as far as I can see, and there is only. If we were going to defer this for looking at layout, I cannot see anything other than saying that it is that is related to the effect on that road and those houses there, because I cannot see any other reason for doing it. I know the officers have said what they've said. I think we probably do have to have a look at it, but if it comes back and that is the best location, then we're just going to have to swallow it. But I'm going to bring this debate to a close with a vote on deferral on the ground of the particular location of that building, and to see whether or not it can, the effect on that row of houses and the road can be mitigated, and because otherwise we are just going to go round and round in concentric circles for a very long time. But members, be aware that if it comes back and we've looked at it and this is the best location, we will be approving it then. Okay, is that clear? Right. Anything you want to add at this point? No. Right. Deferral for that one reason on the grounds I've stated. All those in favour? Those against? Abstentions? Be it noted for the record, Councillor Powell is not uninterested, but because he entered the debate late, the protocols don't allow him to. Right. I'll give people a minute or two to sort themselves out as we move on to the excitement, and I do mean excitement, of East Sutton. Right. Are we ready to move on with East Sutton? Almost. Well, in that case, as the legal officer needs to get some water, and one or two other people may need to do something else. 2-minute break.